Growing up, I never encountered St. Ignatius of Antioch or heard of him. I think St. Augustine, probably in college was the first time. I'd probably heard of him before, but that's the first time I'd read and been exposed to St. Augustine. But St. Ignatius of Antioch didn't know he existed until I started talking with my friend that had converted, and he was talking about the church fathers and looking into more of that stuff. When I first started reading St. Ignatius of Antioch, it's probably curiosity was the first thing, because in the context I was kind of aware of church fathers, and then and coming at it from, like, wondering, do these guys like teach these Catholic things or write about Catholic beliefs like the real presence or bishops? So kind of curiosity and a little bit of skepticism in when he does talk about those things, saying, okay, is there a way this can be understood that isn't the Catholic view? Which obviously some people do think that, and there is, conversations to be had about that, but definitely a little bit of skepticism, but mostly curiosity of just like, I kind of didn't really know that these guys were there first, and there's a lot of testimony there. And so, a lot of Protestant churches have this like desire you hear, and especially new church plants, like, okay, we're starting a plant and we want to go back to the way the early church was. And so it's kind of this like house church type deal. And that intuition of like wanting to go back to the early church. But I'd never realized, but we have so much testimony after the New Testament is written about what the early church looked like and how it developed, The first piece that was about St. Ignatius and just the context of his life, he's writing these letters to churches on the way to being martyred. And so that's just the context. And then realizing like, he's going to be murdered for his faith. And so he's writing these letters to them. And so it's interesting that he is writing them to churches that he wasn't like the pastor of. And so as he's traveling, ones in other areas, and then, just the things that he talks about where, his big emphasis is on unity with the bishop, and then like a proper Eucharist, which has to be done in unity with the bishop. And I don't know how many times he says like, obey your bishop, submit to your bishop, and then says, do that in the same way like Christ submits to God. And so he's laying out this hierarchical structure of the church, and then also the sense in which we're to be obedient to priests and bishops and church leaders for the unity of the church. And then the sacraments are only valid within that context as well. So there's so many pieces of that were pretty important, because the structure of the church, within which he is talking, was so different than the type of Protestant churches I'd been a part of, where it's not individual congregational churches that are congregational, but you have a church that's united across countries and cities that has a hierarchy. That the things he's saying is also connected to like the structure of the church itself, which I just didn't really have a context for, or to say I've been a part of a church that has that same structure and beliefs. I think his role was initially more important, because he opened the door for me recognizing that the early church believed in real presence, that there were bishops and this hierarchical structure of the church. And so that was like a big piece for me of saying, what the church looks like, that Ignatius was part of, who is so close to the apostles, that I've never been a part of a church that's been close to that. And so it was really initially that he kind of opened some of those doors. And then later on, when I was actually deciding and really wrestling with like, when do I do this? And some of the fears with that, it was just his example, his personal example of following the truth to death, where he is not afraid of being torn apart by lions in the Colosseum, because this is the truth. And so just asking for his intercession for the same type of courage and perseverance of, I'm not getting torn apart by lions, so nothing that bad, but him being convinced of the truth and following Christ, and it being worth it no matter what, is an example that was huge for me. When I went to choose a confirmation saint, there were a couple options. St. Augustine was a big one, St. Thomas Aquinas was one, and then St. Ignatius of Antioch. So I really kind of went back and forth on all those three, but I came back to St. Ignatius because just of how early his testimony is to some of these beliefs that were Catholic, and again, just his personal example. And so he kind of stuck out to me. I would encourage somebody who isn't familiar with St. Ignatius of Antioch or other early church writings, don't be intimidated by it, because there might be a feeling around it that it's something that's inaccessible or we can't understand, but they're very readable. They're pretty short letters. I mean, you can easily read all 7 of St. Ignatius's letters in one sitting. And there's so much just spiritual wisdom in them, encouragement. And then, yeah, the parts where he talks about some of the more distinct Catholic doctrines are worth wrestling through and thinking about. Okay, if this is, St. Ignatius is this close to the apostles, and he's immediately writing these things. Is it more likely that the truth has already been corrupted this quick after the apostles, or what the proper interpretation of what is revealed in the New Testament has been passed down? We see testimony of that in his writings, because you see that in him, and then it just continues. And so, you'd either have to have an immediate corruption before he wrote some of this stuff, which would be kind of unthinkable, or you might see it down the road, which doesn't happen, And then these are the same people we rely on for the formation of the canon and for the scriptures itself, as well as other foundational beliefs that a Protestant and a Catholic would agree on, things in the Nicene Creed.